Welcome to Monday Matters, everyone. I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have today. This is Mark. Mark is the leader of a marriage small group that we're in. Mark, will you start off a little bit talking about what marriage small group is and how it differs from marriage counseling, why marriage small group is so important?
So I'll actually start by saying how it happened.
Yeah.
Originally, so my own wife, Troy, and I ran a young adult group. So it was post-high school kids that too old to do Sunday school or youth group because they grew out of that, aged out of that, but then kind of too young to join old people in a Bible study, right? And so we started this group, and these 18, 19, 20-something kids coming, and the longer we were around, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it was, they started getting married. And so a few of the couples asked us to do their premarital counseling. And when we finished with one of the couples, they basically said, why would we stop doing this? And really it was kind of talking about them and who they are, their relationship with Christ, and how that was supposed to relate to their marriage and their life and all that stuff. And it made logical sense of why would you stop? And that made us think we should do something about that. Yeah. And so that created a kind of a young married group, and essentially going through kind of a foundation for marriage, different principles. And we've been doing it for I don't know how many years now. And it's a bit different than a Bible study, but it's taken a lot of the same principles. So you wouldn't even have to be married necessarily to get a huge benefit from it. It's taking biblical principles. I mean, we're supposed to be servants for Christ. We're supposed to develop a relationship with Christ, getting closer and closer to Him, which then brings us closer to others, and you're developing this servant mentality.
Yeah, and it's like we go to school, for the jobs that we have. But if we're married, we spend more time with our spouses than we do the job. So it's good to learn about marriage and not just do marriage, because
Correct.
It's one thing to learn by doing. It's another thing to talk to people who've been through marriage like you've been married longer than I have.
Right.
And so being able to ask questions, being able to say, hey, did this work for you guys? Did this not? It's tremendously helpful to learn those tips and tricks, as well as learn how to approach marriage, like you said, from a biblical perspective. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to, I know at Skyrocket, looking forward to starting a marriage group here soon this year. And, we'll, of course, make sure you all know when that happens. But yeah, it's just so important. Can you tell me a little bit about, and just to start off, Mark and I, we want to say, we aren't going to be able to give you a full perspective of marriage because neither of us is a woman. And so our wives, our beautiful wives, are not here. And so just take everything that we say with a grain of salt, please, knowing that we are not claiming to speak authoritatively on everything there is to say about marriage because we can only speak from the husband perspective. Tell me about your wife. Tell me about your guys' marriage. How did you guys meet? How long have you guys been married?
So Troy and I met at a Seahawks football game. It was after they blew up the Kingdom. So we were outside at Husky Stadium in the pouring rain, sat next to each other, a total God thing. There were actually 2 seats between us, and those people never, ever missed a game, except for the one where we both went. That was the only game I went to that year. Sat next to each other, just started talking, and we actually were going to the same church. Just didn't know it because it was a bigger church in Seattle, and like 1,500 people a week kind of a church. And it was just kind of a totally meant to be thing. And we had the same faith, same goals, same commitment to marriage. We met, got engaged about 4 months later, roughly. Married within 10 months of meeting each other, kind of knew, got pregnant within 6 months of being married. Woo. We were a little older, and we were about 30 when we married or even met. So, and then we moved over here. We've always been involved in church, wanting to get connected. One of my sons is a senior, or our sons, in high school, and he was asked, what would you recommend to the underclassmen? And so his thought was pretty good. I think it kind of relates to church too. A teacher had told him, he's like, get involved.
Yeah.
And he said, if you just go to school, because his teacher had told him, when people complain, I hate school, I hate school, he would always ask them why. Or he wouldn't ask why. He would say, what clubs are you in? What activities do you do?
Yeah.
And 100% of the time, nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're not involved, how do you expect to really connect with anybody and do things? So in the process, when we came here in 2008, 2009, that's when we started getting involved. And my first board meeting was Jim's interview on the phone. And then from there, doing the young adult group and now marriage group. And we, again, tying it into marriage, our young marriage group is not marriage counseling.
Yeah.
It's not, tell me all your troubles in marriage, JD. It's not any of that. It's just taking the biblical principles and putting it into marriage. And we have, certain books that we've done several times, and it's going through things like 5 love languages and going through and learning about each other. And if you think about biblical principles, the selflessness, the servant mentality, I feel like a lot of times we put more of that into people at work, people out in the community, but we forget about our spouse. And so we're not really applying that at home. And then a lot of times we wonder, why is it not working?
Yeah.
Kind of
thing. What's going on? And so one of the things, Mark, that really impressed me meeting you and Troy is a lot of people when I meet them, marriage is perceived of in a really negative connotation, right? Like, oh, I'm married. We were, and I forget how we brought it up. A lot of times it's referred to as old ball and chain, right?
Yes.
Like, hey, this is terrible, so boring. And then you just said getting engaged, treating marriage like something to invest in, like really going deep in. I was really impressed meeting you and Troy. You guys were having a lot of fun. And I know like you guys have been married for a while, but hey, this is fun and working on this is fun. So can you give us a tip? What would one marriage tip or takeaway? What's the difference between treating marriage passively versus actively? Like, why should we actively dig into our marriages and try to learn and treat it that way? And does that rob us of the joy, or does it actually make us even more joyful, make it even more fun and rewarding?
Personally, it makes it way more fun and rewarding to me. You hear all the time. So if you look at divorce rates or divorce when they happen, 2 years, I'm bored. This was a really cool idea, but I met somebody cooler, or you're kind of annoying, whatever. I'm going to move on.
You said that's normally at 2 years.
2 years is one of them.
Okay.
7 is another. 7-year itch kind of thing. You can tolerate anything for a while, and then you kind of want to move on. And then like 22 years roughly. So why 22?
It's when the kids are out,
Kids
right?
move out.
Yeah.
You're empty nesting. And so the idea frequently, and you did a sermon when you were here about idols. And so you talk about it's easy to get distracted by your kids. Yeah. And so now you worship your kids. You can get distracted with work, hobbies, whatever. We didn't want to do that. And I was raised, I'm kind of a nerd, just like self-help nerd. Yeah. So I'm always reading those kind of books, and even middle school, high school, I'm reading stuff on love is a decision and the 5 love languages and all those things that are super helpful in everyday relationships, but great for marriage. And what I was raised to look for is to be happy to the end. Yeah. And you can see pictures of what a happy marriage looks like, and it's an old couple that's holding hands and still loving life. And one of the books that, before that, I think one of the things that makes us happily married is choice, for one. But we do the marriage group, so that keeps us strong. We're meeting with other couples. We're going through all these foundational things for them. Guess what? It keeps us with a strong foundation.
So you're getting a lot out of it, even though you're putting into it.
Sometimes more so.
Yeah. Right? Why do you think it's like that? Like, a lot of times we think marriage is just easy. It just happens, and I'm gonna get along. Versus you're telling me that you guys are working hard. Like you said, self-help books. Like you're approaching this as, hey, I need to learn. I need to put effort in. I need to try hard. Why do you think it is that our society, our culture considers marriage oftentimes the exact opposite? Like it's all about how you feel. Correct. Like I want to feel in love, but you're saying no, good marriage is the opposite. Like it's like we need to work at this.
And I don't know that we're working on our marriage. Yeah. But we are.
Yeah.
Indirectly, right? So I also do a men's group.
Yeah.
And so it's men getting together, and it's different conversation. And then Troy has a women's Bible study. So we're doing stuff on our own too. It sounds overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do all that. That's too much. But the relationship stuff matters so much. Like think of our marriage group that we do. Yeah. One of the best things is you're having conversations with other people. And I feel like some of the biggest problems with marriage where people are struggling isn't the big stuff.
Yeah.
It's not he cheated on me, she cheated on me, or, those kind of things. It's more of like, I really hate the way you load the dishwasher or the way you do this or that, or I wasn't raised that way.
Yeah.
Our roles were different, and my wife is supposed to do this and my husband is supposed to do that kind of thing. And so it's those little things that annoy and dig at you. And Troy and I both feel like grace is such a big deal. And if I see her working to be a stronger woman of God, now I see all the ways she's working. If she does something annoying, like, whatever, I don't care. Yeah. It's not that big a deal. And fortunately, she gives me a lot of grace too, because when I do something that's not the best, she's going to be pretty cool about it typically. And I don't think marriage is easy, but I don't think it's hard. I think if you train yourself to, that's a weird word, but really working on being closer genuinely, and I don't ever compare our marriage to somebody else's or me to other people. Yeah. I compare myself to myself and our marriage to our marriage, in that I kind of feel like we should all be trying to be our best version of ourselves. Yeah.
Because that blesses our spouse in return, right? When
Correct.
You're, like you said, your men's group, her women's group, when you're working on each other separately, it benefits the marriage itself.
Correct. Yeah. Kind of weird.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of because you touched on it a little bit, and I want to have a few key takeaways, real practical takeaways. You said a lot of times marriages, it's the small things that get us caught up.
Right.
What you said, offering grace. What does that look like? So, okay, it's good. I want to offer my wife grace. How do I do that? Like what's like an actual, scenario on how I can offer, my spouse grace? And what does it even look like to offer my spouse grace?
So it's a good question. I heard Jim talking about, I think it was Jim, taking yourself down to somebody's level. Why would you want to be at that level? Because you want to rise, right? And so, not that I'm going down to her level or she's going down to my level, but if I'm in a bad mood or grumpy, then should she drop down and do the same, or give grace? Because I'm pretty sure I'm not perfect. We're all human. There's only one perfect person to walk this earth, and it's not us, right? So her offering the grace to recognize that, you know what, maybe I didn't sleep well last night or something, whatever. And so it's kind of looking at it. I just feel like when you see somebody really working to be better and really serving, being a servant to others, there's just something weird about, you kind of want to give them grace.
Yeah. Assuming the best in your spouse. I know this is really, really practical. Like even in my marriage, I've been married. Megan's going to watch this and be like, what? Almost 3 years. And a lot of times when something happens that'll annoy me or that'll annoy Megan, there's a huge difference. If I'm assuming the best, like, oh, maybe she forgot, versus she intentionally did this terrible. It completely changes the way that you view that person,
Correct.
the love of your life. It completely changes the way you view it. And it doesn't just affect that moment. It affects the rest of the day. And then that can carry on to the next day, and that can carry on to the next day. What's the theological basis for this? So you keep saying grace, grace, grace.
I do.
Is that possible without a relationship with Jesus? Like what's the inspiration of grace? Why is our faith so important in how we offer grace to our spouse?
I think there's a lot of good people out there that aren't Christians, but they're missing the understanding of grace. Because what is grace? I messed up. I don't really deserve for you to forgive me or not be mad at me. You should be mad at me because I just did something bad, but you're going to be nice to me and forgive me anyway. Yeah. And so if you don't have the faith and understand what grace really is, I think it's kind of hard to use that concept. And then who's your guide? What are your standards, morals, principles? Where are they based? You and your spouse, you're going to create your own. And that's kind of tough because we're going to mess up. I mean, we're going to mess up. And so it's kind of a tough thing to live have to be perfect. Yeah. Living on eggshells, right? Or walking on eggshells of always worrying about making a mistake, doing something wrong. And you kind of said it, and it's an Andy Stanley thing of assuming the worst. Oh, I know he's out with his buddies drinking and partying, gambling, wasting all our money. Or not assuming, thinking the best, whatever, of, I'm sure he's caught up doing paperwork at work. and he'll be here soon. Yeah, I'm sure, Troy's helping her mom with something, or our kids or something like that. And if one of the things Andy Stanley talks about is if you assume the worst, eventually it's going to happen. If I'm constantly hearing this nagging of, whatever, then I kind of I'm going to gravitate towards that. Yeah. It's just kind of how we are.
Someone might ask you though, well, at what point do you draw the line? So if you're constantly assuming the best in someone, what if you get taken advantage of? Because that might be a worry. Like, sure. Yeah, you want me to assume the best, but what if I know he's out doing that? Right. How do you make those judgment calls? How do you draw the line somewhere, or do you draw the line? Because that's a hard but real life applicable.
It's a great point, and really, all this stuff is nice and warm fuzzy. Yeah, and it sounds great talking about it, but to do it is really hard.
It is.
I mean, it's really hard. So we are not perfect, and our marriage is not perfect. I think it's great. I mean, we have a great time. We really have a good time together, but it is not perfect. I think the reason it's as good as it is because really, I mean, we work pretty hard at being as Christ-like as possible and working on a relationship, not trying to be perfect, just trying to be the best us. And where is that line? Honestly, that's one of my struggles in general of being in the world, because you have to be relatable without fully being of the world and being consumed by it.
And it's probably a lot harder to draw that line if you're in a relationship, in a marriage where you both aren't following Christ.
Correct.
But if you both are following Christ and have this deep understanding of grace, then I think it's a lot easier to trust the other person and to offer them grace versus if your spouse doesn't have this deep understanding of grace that you do, then that humility or willingness to offer grace in return might not, always be there.
And I think everybody has a different line. Yeah. Different boundary, however you want to look at it. And when does God tell us to offer grace and to forgive? Every once in a while?
No.
Right? And
every time.
My job,
the scary part.
Right? My job isn't to keep Troy in line. Yeah. My job isn't to judge her. And my job is to love her. As my spouse, and her job is to love me, and it's not always easy. Yeah. We're supposed to anyway. I think it's super easy to love somebody that's lovable. Yeah. But it's pretty hard to love somebody that's not. And then, again, kind of corny, kind of easy to say when you're not in the moment. Yeah. But the more you work on it, and nobody's going to be perfect at it, but the more you work on it and practice and do it, and you're reading and you're in the Word, like Troy's saying is no Bible, no breakfast.
No Bible, no breakfast.
So she's reading the Bible to start her day. And so how does that start your day?
I've heard the phrase you've said, and I think I've stolen it and used it in a sermon before, but I got it from you, vertical orientation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we kind of talked a bit ago about idols, of worshiping your kids or putting your kids first. Very easy. They're time consuming and they need your focus when they're little especially, and they need your focus all the way through, but vertical alignment or vertical, I don't know how you put it.
Vertical orientation.
Orientation, yeah, either way. Basically, it's putting God first. Yeah. And so if I worship Troy, she's going to fail me. If she worships me, I'm going to fail her. He's not going to fail us. He may take us a different direction than we want to go.
Which is almost counterintuitive, though, because you might think to have the best marriage, you got to put marriage first. You got to be obsessed with the person completely in love. But what you're saying is the best way to a marriage is actually not putting that person first. It's God first.
Which is weird.
It's weird to our culture, right? It's weird to the world and someone who's not a Christ follower. Yeah, that does sound weird. You're telling me I'm going to be a better spouse by not putting my spouse first.
It does sound weird.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. And then and then your kids are going to be below, but I need to pay attention to my kids and put them. And I was the nerd guy, whatever, but I was taught this as a kid, as a teenager. God's got to be first. And I was not always perfect at it, of course, but I took it as God, spouse, kids, whereas Francis Chan is like God, spouse, kids, job, hobbies, whatever. But to me, is a little bit of my interpretation, and I don't know if it's biblical per se, but God's got to be first. Yeah. And I think if you're married, your spouse has to be second. Yeah. I don't think anything can take the second place. And then your kids really should be third. Your spouse is the most important relationship you're going to have on this earth, period.
And putting that spouse above yourself too, because I know that's a big, that's pretty countercultural, is putting someone else's desires. Yeah. It's funny, Megan and I were watching I forget, some reality TV show, and hearing people talk about love, it's like I want it, it's all I language, which is so weird. No, it's not weird. Like, it's very normal. We are weird for because they're talking about love and the desire for a relationship with a lot of I language. I want this. I want to be in, and it's not like they're being mean. They're just like, I want to be in love. I want to have someone. I want to be with someone. I want a partner. Don't put yourself second. Put your spouse second, which honestly is really, really hard. If we're being honest, that's yes, kids are a threat to take that number 2 spot, but I feel like we ourselves are also big threats to take that number 2 spot away from our spouse.
That's true.
And that's countercultural.
So let me ask you a question.
Go for it.
What do you think it looks like to put your God first? So in a marriage, and I could take it on myself too, but because again, it's easier to say God first, then your spouse, then your kids. But what exactly does that mean?
At least in my life, in thought processes, we make decisions every day, right? From what clothes am I wearing today, to what job am I working, to, do I flip off this person on the road when they cut me off, to what am I doing on my, Sunday morning? Am I going to church or not? What am I doing during the week? Am I going to small group? Am I serving or not? Every single day we have tons and tons of decisions. Who am I thinking about when I make those decisions? Because to be quite truthful with you, a lot of times if I'm putting Megan first, I make decisions I don't want to make. Like and even something super, super simple. Like Megan loves kimchi. And so we have a small, tiny thing of kimchi. Guess what? I love kimchi too. And so when that kimchi's in the fridge and there's only a little bit left, am I just like, man, I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat that kimchi. Or I could also say, she's going to get mad at me, so I'm not going to eat it. That's still actually me being selfish. But if it's like, if my thought process is like, wow, she's really going to love to finish that kimchi in the fridge, I'm going to leave it for her. That's how it should be. But she shouldn't be the first. I should think of God. Not that you have to think of God before eating something from the fridge. But seriously, like every big decision in our lives, that's at least to me what that vertical orientation looks like. Is this honoring to God? Is this honoring and loving to my spouse? And sort of going through that list, of priorities, which is so hard to do. Because a lot of times, I know I personally, I make those decisions based on what JD wants versus going through that conscious list. It's high effort.
Very high effort.
Having to do that. But that's what it looks like, is putting God first. And then your spouse second is saying, okay, is this honoring to God? And then is this honoring and loving to my spouse? And with every big decision, and small decisions too, asking yourself those questions before you ask. Much easier said than done.
Correct.
Much easier said than done. What would you say? Would you agree or would you disagree?
I would totally agree with that. I think because of what you said, if you think of our internal sin nature is selfish. And so another book I read, it's talking about if you get a group picture, who do you look for first? Yourself.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, did my hair look okay?
Right. And so if anything comes up, and one of the little things in the books is the selfishness of, in a conversation, the most common word is I. Because we care the most about ourselves.
We like talking about ourselves.
I know more about me than anybody.
Yeah.
And so it's a really common thing. And so the humility of being a true Christ follower, of really having him number one, is selflessness, right? And trying, and we're never gonna be perfect. I mean, I'm not great at it. I try, but I like me a lot. And I want to satisfy me.
Yeah.
So I have to fight, like you said, it is hard, and I have to fight that urge to. I want that kimchi. I don't know that I would want the kimchi, but
here's a question too. So what if, okay, I want to put my spouse first. Sometimes me trying to do that, it's easier said than done. What are some communication tips that you would have for us as married couples? Because a lot of times it comes to, at least I found a breakdown in communication where maybe I do have the best intentions, but it doesn't necessarily come across that way. What have you found are some good, just in your years of marriage, some good communication strategies or tips that help communicate that love and that care for your spouse if this is the road you're trying to go down?
So it has to be centered around a person's communication style.
What's a communication style?
So you could take 5 love languages and look at it that way.
So 5 love languages, that's based on...
it's a book. It's called 5 Love Languages.
5 Love Languages. Okay, so look that up. 5 love languages.
the very basics of it are simple.
Okay.
Reading the book is way better than just looking at the prints. It's great to just know and understand. So they're physical touch, quality time. I'm going to forget them all probably now. Gifts, giving of gifts, words of affirmation, and acts of service. Thank you. Yeah. Right. And so if I am touch, physical touch, that's just my language. So if somebody has that as their language, but their language, they don't like touch, that's like a 0. Yeah. And you're always like touching them and doing that stuff because that's how I communicate.
Yeah. So you're trying to tell them, show them that you care and that you love them and you're putting them first. But if they don't receive love that way, they're not going to feel that.
Correct. They're actually going to feel like you're freaking me out. You're like, you're really bugging me versus if it's acts of service. Yeah. But I don't do any of the chore stuff that needs to get done. I just kind of, well, no, that's again, going back to roles that you grew up with watching. Yeah. Well, my mom always did that. Yeah. So my wife should always do that. My dad did this, so I should always do this. Then that communication style of, internal processor versus external or verbal processor, somebody that's a verbal processor dominates conversation usually or a marriage because I don't have time to wait for you to process this. I need to know what's going on. And then they just keep kind of going. So it's learning, understanding that how somebody wants to talk and have the conversation. What you say matters. How you say it, the environment of how you say it matters more, in my opinion.
And that's why I think it's so important. It might seem weird, but it's so important for us to almost take this analytical strategic sounds boring, and maybe that's not the case, but intentional, that's probably a better word to say. Super intentional approach where with your spouse, not just continuing to communicate, but say, okay, let's figure out how we can communicate effectively. A marriage group is a great way to do that. Correct. To talk with people who've been, through marriage for a really long time and have gone through this. Let's sit down and figure out how can I communicate effectively to you? Yeah. How can you communicate effectively to me? And then trying it out. So not just like treading water floating, but being intentional, having a game plan, really trying to be better, digging into it. Because I feel like these communication strategies, they don't just fall in our laps. Correct. We have to take quizzes. We have to talk and communicate with each other. What did that fill you up, or did that not fill you up when I gave you that word of affirmation? Or did you want to just be held, physically? But being intentional, I think, is just so
absolutely, because if you read a book, that's awesome. I love that. That's so great. Yeah. Put it away. Right. Then you're done with it. And if you're not, why do you go to church once a week? At least, maybe more.
It's the repetition.
The consistency, the repetition, the over and over and over to develop it into, that's how I'm going to live my life. Yeah. And so that's why a group, Bible study, marriage group, going to church, taking it and running with it is such a big deal, in my opinion. Otherwise, and sharing with others. You hear other people going through some of the same stuff.
You're not alone when you butt heads communication-wise. Guess what? We all do, right?
Correct. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you for joining us this week. Part 2 of our marriage talk is going to be next week, so make sure you tune in next week as well.